Perfect. Thanks, Gareth. Welcome. I know that we went through the idea of switching cameras off and things like that, but actually there's a very small number of people here, so we can make this incredibly interactive. If you do want to switch your camera on and nod when I say things or not, that's always quite helpful because I'm looking at, otherwise I'm sort of trying to work out what's going on. I also have a bit of a rule that if you do break in or you say something, cut across anybody or anything, no apologies. You know, let's make this as interactive as possible. So I've got a set of slides I'm going to work through, but I am actually going to get you to do some work. So if you've got a piece of paper and a pen with you to capture some notes and things, that would be particularly handy. I'm also going to get you to annotate the screen if that's okay with you, and there are no prizes for typos or anything like that. I mean, it's just go for it. If you misspell things, don't worry about it. So if I can, I'll first of all share my screen. That's the list that Gareth went through, so I don't plan to go through that again. But basically, why am I sitting here and why am I doing this? I come from a background of business performance and leadership consulting, particular interest in the whole idea of how you get the best out of people, how you manage an environment to get the best, and clearly managing challenging behaviour in that from various challenging situations is something that I've worked with for a number of years. I'm also a coach developer. I know some names here, and I've been coach developing for a little while. I won't say how long. I'm also a coach with actually what is the best club in the UK. It's Farnham Triathlon Club. It's based in Surrey, and while you're on mute and off camera, you can't debate that with me, so that's quite clear. And I put facilitator there because actually what I have is a passion for facilitating conversations and environments in order to allow people to perform at their best. I mean, I get a lot of excitement and enthusiasm out of that. And the last thing I've put on there is crisis volunteer. And the reason I've stuck that on there is because in the last 18 months or so, I've been doing some crisis volunteer work for mental health. And it's been absolutely fascinating about how to work with challenging behaviours and challenging situations, and the power of listening and the power of building relationships with people, which is where I'm going to go with a number of the points that I'm going to make tonight. So that's why I happen to be sitting here. And by the way, at any point, if you want to jump in and ask questions, you know, please do put things in the chat. Michelle's monitoring that. We can take this wherever you like because it's a nice small group. In fact, it's such a small group. I've just put everybody on the screen so I can see. So we're going to explore some of these challenging situations that cause challenging behaviours. Have a think about where actually the challenge may come from, because I think what's quite interesting is inside us we start to build up a particular sense of what we want to get from a conversation and from a particular situation, and sometimes that can have a negative effect and sometimes it can have a positive effect. So where does that challenge come from? And let's think about some practical management. All of these things are useful if you can take something away and have something usable at the end of it, and I hope that's the plan. That's what we can do. I am going to make it practical. There are opportunities to join in through the chat and a couple of on-screen activities where you can type some things in. But basically what I'm really interested in doing is working together and getting our combined experience. You know, one of the things about turning up at the conference this week is there's a huge amount of experience out there, and that'll go for the people who are listening to this on record later. And we can all learn from each other, so I'm really keen that we capture that. So the agenda, we're going to have a think about what challenging situation might be, and that will be different for each of us, and the level of challenge will be different for each of us. what creates that challenging situation, and some of the behaviors that you'll see and experience coming off the back of it, and some of the reactions. Where it comes from, I want to spend a little bit of time on some simple neuroscience, some of the things that are going on in people's brains as the challenges and the behaviors start to develop, and share some research with a few people that you can then take away and have a look into. And then we'll get on to actually what do you do about it. And as ever, there's always a set of top tips, but you can add your own. The bit at the end is the so what question. I'm a huge believer in taking action away from things. If you don't take action away, then it's all happy chatting and it's all very pleasant. But actually, what are you going to do with this? So I've got some questions to challenge yourselves at the end. So first of all, just want to have a think about and get you involved. Good to see you, Ian. Just saying that some of this is going to be interactive, so I'm going to share a whiteboard, and I want for you to actually write on the whiteboard. There should be an annotate at the top of it when I put it up. So there is a whiteboard. You can go along the top, and there is text, draw, stamp, spotlight. There's a whole load of things you can do there. What I'd like you to do is just pick out the text input there and type in what are some of those challenging situations that you come across. What might be things that have happened, bearing in mind we're talking about triathlon and the whole sport. Anybody not got that as a...
So we can write on that whiteboard.
You can write on that whiteboard. If you go to the top, you'll see, do you see a little black bar along the top? There you go. Somebody's, thank you, Tracy.
I don't see the black bar. I see a pencil on the board.
Okay, if you go up near the top, there should be a black bar with select text, draw, stamp. I mean, you can actually write with the pencil. It's just a little bit more difficult with the mouse.
Okay.
If anybody wants to come off mute and talk about it, I'm more than happy because there's only a small number of you. Selection disputes, yes, quite. I'm assuming by that, Ian, you're meaning the sort of age group and team selections. Is that the sort of thing?
Yeah, I look after youngsters, but so IRC selection and things like that.
So you probably nicely mixed with parental behaviour as well then?
It was merely parental behaviour, and I thought I'd put something different.
Hmm. Other things that anybody wants to put up there?
Now we're talking, I think. So I found it. Thanks, Michelle.
We'll get the hang of this by the time we get to the third one, don't worry. You type very quietly, Jörg. I'm very impressed.
Can you read that?
I can't read it yet. It hasn't appeared yet.
So do I have to say? Okay.
Oh, there we go. How much is that challenge working at the moment, Jörg? That whole idea, travel, not travel. What's happening in that situation?
It's the whole opt-in, opt-out conversation. So these days, you know, let's assume for a moment you can travel, but then you still have to do the opt-in, opt-out conversation, and through the conversations I had with coaches and practitioners, some are pretty unsure, to say the least, and they think kind of, yeah, I'm just, you know, we're looking back in 12 months' time, I was just part of a super spreader.
Right.
So shall I go and not? How do I have that conversation with my line manager, my boss?
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that are going on in people's brains while we're worrying about some of that lack of certainty and things, and some of the difficulties that will go with that. Is anybody else, Michelle, is there anything coming up in the chat?
Sorry, no, when you've got annotate on, it's not that easy to get your mute button off. I have discovered that. It's just me typing in the chat at the moment, just reminding people, if you've not used the annotate before, if you just go to the top of your screen and hover over the view options, you'll then get a little drop down which gives you the annotate, and then you'll be able to select a T for text, or later on you might want to use some of the stamps and arrows and things to help you.
It's interesting, some of these are coming down to the certainty and the uncertainty, and then the actual dispute that comes off the back of that. Okay. Has anybody got anything else they want to put in, and then we'll move on, and we'll get to grips with this as we go through, because there's a couple of these to work on. Anything else that anybody wants to put? Demotion in funding from where?
Well, that's maybe not very good English, but you have a certain level of funding, you get 20K, you're demoted down to 15K.
Okay, yeah. So that's a sort of like a personal funding.
Yes, that would, yeah, annual personal award, APA.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. As I say, we'll come back to these in a minute. So I'm just going to clear this down and go back to the slides, if that's okay. But just, if these are quite peculiar to you as we go through, have a think about some of the things that we do talk about later and how they might help in actually having some of these conversations. So let me just go back to the... So everybody got the slides there. Yeah, you've come up with some interesting ones that I hadn't come up with. There are things that are going to happen in terms of rules. There's things that are going to happen in terms of events. As coaches, we'll come across various situations where we have some sometimes quite extreme disagreements on coaching points. And then obviously we're always trying to manage an environment with the appropriate behaviour. And then from a club perspective, those of us that are in clubs, whole piece around club management and changes of committees and so on. I've in our club, I've now been through, I don't know, 6 or 7 different committees, and that's quite interesting as we go through that. So then we've got these challenging situations. So then let's think how things might develop. So if people are in challenging situations, what are some of the underlying feelings that may be happening for someone to cause a challenging behavior? Now, what might be going on inside someone? And as an example, you know, there may be, when we come into events, clearly there's a whole bunch of nerves. Nerves is one of them. So I'm just thinking now, capture on the whiteboard, what are some of the things that might be you know, anxiety might be something. What other things are you going to see? Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Yes. Embarrassment. Yeah. Any particular situations where you're seeing that, Ian?
I remember getting DQ'd in a race, and you get angry because you're a bit embarrassed at the whole situation. So you're getting angry with race officials because you know that you've done something wrong, or you might dispute whether you've done it wrong or not, but there's the whole saving face in front of your peers kind of thing.
Yeah, it's where it comes from, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely aggressive, anger, that sort of pressure. Nerves do some really interesting things to people. We'll talk a little bit about how some of these things actually play on your brain and what they do. Who put the hiding? What's the hiding one?
Well, I guess it's combined and connected to being embarrassed. You know, I hide, so I go and I basically I go away.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so the reaction of the behavior I see as somebody going quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it could be replaced by going quiet, hiding, not be seen, as opposed to fight, being aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah, it can happen. We'll talk a little bit about that whole fight flight piece when we get a bit further into this.
Yeah.
Okay. I can see various other people joining, so they're probably wondering quite what we're doing at this stage in terms. Are you keeping them up to date, Michelle, with what's going on?
I am. I'm just adding things in the chat box. Welcome to everyone who's just joined us a bit late. If you've not previously used the annotate function before, just hover at the top of your screen and go to view options and select annotate. And then hopefully be able to use the text to write on the screen as Chris poses the questions for you. But as we're a small group, please feel free, everyone, to come off mute, share your screens and interact with the session. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so I'll move on from this one. So, I mean, I really like that embarrassment one, because I think there's some real power in how embarrassment develops from particular things. But, you know, there's heightened excitement. There is this whole nerves thing. There's the passion and enthusiasm. I think one of the things that I do find with this sport is people are incredibly passionate and incredibly enthusiastic, and that actually creates a sort of welling up of feelings and some of the physical reactions that you get to those feelings. I added on there showing off. I mean, I found some quite interesting behaviours when people are actually trying to be top dog and to be out there and share with others perhaps some of their success. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about here. I'll let you have a look at that, and then what we're going to do is we'll work through this. What we see and where some of this comes from. So let's start with genes in the middle. Okay, your genes are what they are. To some degree, blame your parents. There's not a great deal that you're going to be able to do about it. I know there's some research now about actually how it all fits back to your DNA, and some things can change, but fundamentally that's where we're starting. And what happens as we grow up, we create this personality, we grow this personality, and this is the good old nature versus nurture debate that if we started that now, we'd still be here at 3 o'clock in the morning. There is clearly a balance between nature and nurture. What's interesting here is that personality is particularly influenced during the years age 7 to 14. And that is at the point at which you're very influenced by people who are in authority. And I don't mean by people who are in authority, I don't mean necessarily the police force or anything like that. I just mean people you look up to, people that you see a behavior and go, actually, that's a behavior that I would like to adopt and something that I will learn from. Could be good, and it may be negative. And the reason it's 7 to 14, that personality thing, is because girls will tend to start that process sooner than boys, and boys carry on longer. And we know that there's lots of research around puberty. The next ring around that is values. And as we start to take on information, we start to judge particular situations and go, that's actually something that I'm going to put into my belief system. And we come up with a set of values. And there's a group of us here, if I went through, we would have we've probably got some very similar values because the sport brings that, you know, which came first, the sport or us, and we'll have some similar ones, but we'll also have some quite different ones. And anybody who's been through any of the training and things within British Triathlon will, you know, you'll probably remember those ones where you have to stand at different ends of the spectrum and decide where your position is, and then you realise what a spread of values that people have. And then around the outside that, we have a set of behaviours. That's what you see. You're seeing me speaking. You're probably seeing I sometimes wave my hands around quite a bit, even on camera. You'll see a set of things I'm doing. What is interesting by this is, whilst we see the behaviours, very often we think that's why we think that the person is doing it for a given reason. But actually what we're doing is we're judging people by our own values. So whilst we may have quite different values, I will judge your behaviour by my values, not by yours, because I don't know yours. So there's some slight mismatch here when we start to judge how things are taking place. So I want to sort of sow that seed and hold on to it as we go through, because some of the models later on that we talk about will keep coming back to that idea of how we judge others. So then let's look at what might be some challenging behaviour, things that you might see and experience, and things that you might experience from others. This starts quite quietly, by the way, but anybody who knows this piece of footage will know it ends quite loud.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious. That ball was on the line. Short flew up.
Okay, so nice little piece. I'm sure most people can quote that all the way through. So behaviours you may see and experience. Let's come off mute if anybody's got anything to say. What are the sort of things that were starting to come out there? What were you seeing in that clip?
Chris, it's Steve. Anger, frustration,
and how
and the belief. He had the belief that the ball was in, so he followed his belief and challenged the referee.
And he had such a strength in that as well, that very quickly the sort of power of that anger came through.
I think the other thing is it wasn't just that he believed the ball was in, he believed he was right and the referee was wrong.
Yeah. And how did that, so that might be the values piece. What were some of the behaviors around the outside that you saw? I mean, just in very simple terms, what were some of the things that came out?
Well, aggressive, and he became louder and louder.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you certainly heard it at the end, I guess.
And if you looked at his facial expression and his body language, it was very kind of angry and aggressive and sort of antagonistic as well.
Yeah, very much so, Susie. You could see that the way he was swinging his racket around, ready to throw it, I think.
And it's quite intense. Say again?
Quickly.
Sorry, I missed.
He was out of control very quickly.
I'm going back to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of inflamed incredibly fast, didn't it? Other things that he was doing? In fact, the bottom picture that's probably showing at the moment gives some indication. Huge gestures, you know, real sort of powerful sort of movements and gestures that were coming out.
Well, he didn't point with the fingers at the referee, but with his racket, you know, sort of to reinforce his message.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and interesting what you were saying earlier, Jörg, about the quiet piece quite interesting. I mean, these are not directly from that piece of footage, but you know, you get the shouting. You do get people going very quiet and holding the silence, because that's actually a very, very powerful thing to do if you're feeling you know in an argumentative or a challenging mood. There's a lot of leaning in. I mean, there was that body language piece, the intensity of that that Susie was talking about. There's threatening behavior. Interesting, not in that clip, but you do get some of the involving other people. How do you know, that whole idea of actually, if I can draw some other people into my argument, I'm actually going to get people to back my argument, and it gives me some more power. So that whole sort of dragging the herd in as well. So those are behaviors. Okay, so I'm separating out what you actually see rather than necessarily. I mean, there's an interesting one. Somebody said about being in control or not in control. I wonder how much he was in control or not in control, because his behavior is very much, it was recognized that was one extreme version, but of a set of behaviors that he always delivers. You know, he's that sort of person. So I wonder how much he was actually in control and using it quite deliberately to get a message across, and the power of that.
I think he was very much in control. I mean, I've seen him much worse. So I think in this very particular clip, he knew exactly what he was doing. They missed him on the tour when he retired. I think he has been replaced now by a guy from Greece and one from Australia. Is that correct? So I think I mean, that's just me. I think he's very in control. He knows exactly what he's doing.
I agree with you 100%. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had his body language. He approached the referee's bench with strength. He knew it's a common thing for him. If he'd have lost control, he'd have thrown his racket.
Yeah, and you know, for me, that for my values, I would feel incredibly uncomfortable trying to do that and behave in that way in public. I mean, that just, for me, that is not something that sits comfortably with me. So I actually find it slightly nervous watching that sort of behavior and seeing people do that. Clearly something he's comfortable with. And that's that difference between how you judge things. I judge that as an over-the-top antagonistic outburst. Actually, it may well have been a lot more controlled, because his values are different than mine. I'm going to carry on for a moment, because there's a small group of us. We're working through this reasonably quickly. So what I want to do, I will give you a chance to have breaks, by the way, and make cups of tea and whatever needed. I just want to explore a little bit about what our brains do while we're in these challenging situations. So very simply, our brains are managing threat and reward at all times. Our brains are working out, is there in everything that's coming to us through all of our senses, through our hearing, our sight, smell, the whole thing, is this a threat or is this a reward? And it's quite a simple process that we're dealing with. And I think this is quite important as a basis for understanding the situations, the challenging situations that create those challenging behaviors. So Daniel Siegel has, is anybody familiar with Daniel Siegel's work? Nod, shake. So what I'd like you to do is like to put your hand up like that with your fist closed and your thumb inside. Okay, all right, that's your brain. Okay, this is the top of the brain. This is the frontal lobe, right? That's the spinal cord. That's the bit that's going down and actually causing the processing down to your body. And this bit inside, if you open up, that's your fight, flight, freeze. That's the bit that goes pop when something becomes threatening and you become stressed and under pressure. And people might be familiar with the Chimp Paradox and the work that Steve Peters did. He has different phrases for this. Daniel Siegel has the idea of flipping your lid. If you flip your lid, this is the bit that's going to react. Okay, and the reason I share that is because that piece inside is going to work just millions of times faster than the processing element at the frontal lobe and the data at the top. It works fast. It's a good job it works fast. It's a really important piece, because if you step out onto a road and a car hoots the horn at you, you want that thing to work very quickly. You want it to make you stop or jump out of the way or do something. So it has your best interests at heart. However, it does tend to get out of control if you forget to use the thinking part of the brain. Other things to have a think about here, there's yellow brain, blue brain. Those are two different paces of brain. And then there's the thinking fast and slow, the Daniel Kahneman work. This is basically saying much the same thing, that what you've got is a nice slow processing piece, and you've got a very fast reaction piece. And how are you going to tap into both of those? Now, go back to John McEnroe, it's quite interesting. Did this actually fire? And was that in control? Or was the other piece, the processing piece, in control? Because what I just, as I was thinking about this, the slow pace that he built towards that argument was quite interesting. He didn't do anything to start with apart from just look and hesitate. And then he made a comment, and then gradually it started to ramp up. So I wonder which bit, maybe the processing piece was actually in control, and it wasn't quite the flipping the lid that one thinks.
I mean, what threw him, sorry to come in, what threw him, I didn't really hear the referee. Did that wind him up? It looked like the referee wasn't really reacting. And did that wind him up so that he sort of got a bit louder just to make sure, well, have you heard me?
The referee actually, I think, just confirmed that he was going with the umpire and said the ball was out. So I think he was just confirming that it was out.
Yeah, he would have none of it. Yeah. Yeah.
What did you say? Right. Okay. Now we'll start moving towards it. But it was an interesting slow pace of how that started to build up. So again, thinking about these challenging situations, thinking about the challenging behavior, what is actually happening in the conversations we're having with people. And by the way, this is happening if you're in a challenging situation. This is happening to you and happening to the other person. So you're starting to get now a mismatch of pace of thinking, and some people will react faster than the others. The other bit I just wanted to share, because I think it's quite an interesting element of what's going on. Is anybody familiar with Stephen Porges' work and the polyvagal theory, or the vagus nerve? I don't know how many doctors we got on here and people who, right? So you're very familiar with this, are you, Susie?
Stephen Porges, but I do know what the vagus nerve does.
So he just talks about the link between the brain, the heart, the stomach, and the intestine, and that sort of direct link between all four. And what's interesting here is that you can control your reactions from any one of those, and you can upset your reactions from any one of those. So do you take control of your brain? Do you breathe deeply and slow physiologically down? What's going on in the stomach, and so on? They're all triggers that people will be feeling when they're actually anxious, nervous, building up to something, going into stressful situations and challenging situations. So there's some interesting reading around that. So really, I just wanted to share some thoughts that you can go and research. So in terms of starting to think about what you do in terms of managing those challenging behaviors, communication is an absolute key element of this. Any thoughts about key ways of communicating, key things that you need to do in terms of the attributes of communication that are actually going to manage these behaviors? Any thoughts from anybody who wants to lob things in? Just come off mute. And yeah, absolutely, Tracy. And just develop that. Can you add anything else to that? Listen in order to
really understand, to get their position.
Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting piece about listening, and is that, do we actually listen to understand, or do we listen to work out when it's our time to talk?
Well, I guess generally it would be listening to understand. You know, like any situation would have a context. So is that an offender that repeats and the very same comes again and again and sort of breaks the rules? I might just listen. I might just listen to get my turn. But in general, yes, listen to understand. Mismatch the behavior, especially if it's aggressive behavior. So again, I would probably depend on what's the behavior that I see. Is it someone that is freezing, someone that gets aggressive, or someone that is even walking away? So depending on that, I would tailor communication, but generally mismatch. So if it's loud, I'd go very, very quiet. And obviously, if it's someone that goes quiet, and it's silence, I would probably try to break the silence with a very open question or a gesture.
I mean, that's an interesting one, because there is some theory around actually mirroring a behavior will build a level of rapport quite quickly. So, to pace yourself and pace your conversation at the same pace as the conversation coming to you is something that can make people feel that you're on their side, even if the words are coming out differently. And I think is that Pam's point about trying to understand where people are coming from, absolutely firmly standing in their shoes and seeing it from their point of view. Just because I have an argument about a misdemeanor in transition doesn't mean it's about rules. It may be back to the point that Ian made earlier. I might be just embarrassed by having made a mistake or got something. So what problem am I trying to fix? I need to understand. I need to understand where somebody's coming from. So I think there's a couple of other things I would go in there. There's that point about silence. I think silence is the most incredibly powerful thing. I mean, as human beings, for some reason, we're not brilliant with silence. It seems to be an opportunity to fill it. But I do think it's a very powerful thing to allow people to process and think. And then there's the point about challenging with positive intent. And here I'm thinking, if you want something to move forward, you have to challenge, you have to push back, you have to give a little bit of pressure in a conversation. But do you do it with positive intent, or do you do it to wind the situation up further? And I think challenge with positive intent is one of those particular communication attributes, if you like. And the other is the choice of the next step, because having done all of that, you have an opportunity to decide what your next step is. And that comes down to how you feel and what your choice is. So this is something that I found really interesting in terms of listening to understand, silence, and being able to challenge. I mentioned at the beginning of the work I'm doing with a crisis volunteer, and it just struck me that what we do is we communicate with people in crisis who are clearly in challenging situations and having challenging behavior. We communicate by text, and we have 160 characters to get messages across and have a conversation with somebody and understand where they're coming from. So I just thought it might be quite an interesting little exercise that if you've got a piece of paper there, what I'd like you to do is write 160 character text to express your position. Think of something where somebody disagreed with your view. It might be at work, it might be your family, it might be something like that. It might be something where somebody's disagreed with your view and you felt, actually, I need to express my position. 160 characters to express your position. And by the way, you can either count the spaces or not spaces and punctuation. That's entirely up to you. And when you've done it, let's see how that works. And if you've got 160 characters and you've got a text, why not share it in chat? So my question about that is, how easy was it to express your whole position in 160 characters? If you want to come off mute and have a chat about it, that's good.
That's totally impossible. You can't do it.
When you say you can't do it, what actually was going on for you?
So for me, through my head was, well, how do I even start to explain the position? Never mind express the position in 160 characters.
Yeah. And then you've got feelings on top of that. How do you get your feelings in there as well?
Yeah.
In order to get that across. And anybody else? Anybody managed to get a really neat 160 characters to express their position?
No, I mean, I haven't even started yet. Well, actually, I have 4 words. I need to clarify. And sort of, I have a model in my head. It's called the peak model. P for position, E for evidence, E for I just forgot, you see, and C for continue forward. So I've got, it definitely takes me longer, especially if this is, you know, a challenging thing. First of all, I was thinking about a real situation, like a real situation that would help me to go through. So yes, I'm nowhere, and that model would help me sort of maybe get a bit of clarity, you know, get the top part of the brain in action. Yeah, to process that. Yeah.
So you know, there's almost a flip-flop going on.
Yeah.
Between that, I've got to process this and I've got to think about it and I've got to take my time because this is actually quite a structured thing I'm doing. And inside going, well, this is ridiculous. I don't know why I'm even doing this. It's so this little bit here is sort of flagging up, well, hang on a minute, why am I doing this? What's quite interesting is you do start to hone it down, and I can, Tracy, I can see you're still working, determined to get your 160 characters. But as you start to hone that down, you actually slow some of the processing down and just start to think about, okay, what is really meaningful that I want to get across here? And then the other question I ask at the end is, okay, so how did that land with the other person? So when you read that back and you look at it and you go, okay, how does it land with the other person? How have you expressed something that you've actually connected with somebody else? Because this is how you feel, but they're going to feel something at the same time. And what's quite interesting is you can start to build rapport through a series of step-by-step 160 characters. Expressing situation. I mean, what you also do, by the way, is you learn to use apostrophe S and things like that, so you can save a bunch of characters. But that's a technical point rather than but it just what I'm just trying to show is the difference, the switching between the different parts of the brain. And as you start to slow down, you start to think about this thing differently. And I really like the fact that try and understand where they're coming from sits in the middle of that. Is still there on the screen. Pam's point.
I mean, something that I've done in the past, and I don't know what you think about it, but if I shared with someone in writing, I mean, ideally, I have a conversation with the person face to face. If it's, you know, a tricky one, but there were a few times, yes, I was writing before I sent it. I did. I let it proofread, you know, someone did, you know, a good friend, a critical friend, just to get a reaction. How does that land? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because, you know, in this day and age, you know, you're in court in no time. So I did that a few times. I must say, yeah, very positive, and before sending it.
Yeah. And that's what happens with this. You know, you start to go back and go, okay, I really need to get a bit more feeling in this, or I need to take a bit of feeling out of it, and you can gradually start to hone a description. But all the time you're doing it, you're better understanding how that's going to land with the other person. And also, it's what's going on in your brain. Is it that or that that's firing? And that was the experience of that. What I'm going to suggest is, because we've been going 50 minutes now, do people want to take a sort of 5-minute break, grab a cup of tea? If you want to leave your cameras on, switch them off, however you like.
Sorry to interrupt. Just before we do, Susie's posted an example.
I'm sorry?
Susie's just posted an example in the chat box. And I think there's one more coming as well, if you want to have a quick look on those just before. Everyone was just running for their kettles, I could tell, sorry.
Let me go, because I have to turn off my sharing so I can see the chat box. Yeah, I got Susie's. So there's something in there about I get you, I understand you, which is great, because actually I'm meeting you somewhere with your position. I disagree with it, and I want to take some action and go forward. So yeah, I get where you come from with that.
So Steve Hunter,
Say a bit more, Steve. Tell me a bit more. Sorry, you can come off mute if you want to speak. No problem at all. I get that. So that's your peak model, yeah. So this is the position, evidence, effect, and continue. So I mean, there's things that I would perhaps put in there is actually exploring the other person's position a little bit more. I mean, it'd be interesting. While I understand your concerns, Susie, you know, how are you going to actually to understand their concerns even more? So maybe there's something in there. You know, I'm really interested in understanding your concerns. Tell me more. It's quite useful. And then they're starting to express things that you can then start to deliver. So there's a little bit more about the questioning in there, I think. So can I suggest that we grab a 5-minute break? Is everybody good for that? Grab a cup of tea, stand up, walk around, stretch your legs, and then we'll come back and start carrying on with some of the models that maybe we can start using when we go through this.
Good was that.
Good.
We'll see you all in a few minutes, everyone.
Thank you.
How are we doing for people being back? How do we know that everybody's back, by the way?
Ian's going to be a couple of minutes. He's just having to make an omelette because he just got back in from his bike ride when it started. He was late, so he will be joining us again in a moment. He's saying start without. He can hear what's going on.
Excellent. You're on, yeah. Say again, Michelle.
Sorry, standard mute as always. You've just got a comment in the chat box from Tracy. I don't know if you can see it at the moment. I think it is something that you're about to come on to later, but you might just want to pick that up now as well.
Yeah, if I don't cover it, let's come back to it. But I've got a few things I want to talk through, different models.
I thought that would be the case. I just didn't want to forget.
And some of the decision making you might make off the back of that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Bill and Lou, they're saying connecting to audio. I'm just seeing where they're up to.
while we're waiting, do you think it's possible, because I'm obviously missed the introductions, I was just, rather than Googling you, Chris, can you tell me what your background is? Because what you're saying is really fascinating.
Okay, that's very kind, thank you. So my current role is a business performance and leadership consulting. I actually come from a long background of leadership because I believe that leadership is a career and not something you get to when you become very expert at your role. And therefore, because it's about the people and it's about creating the environment for people to get on. And that's been my passion. I'm a coach developer, so I'm a tutor with British Triathlon. I run the high performing coach program with a few others, and also the mentoring program and things like that. And I do quite a bit of work with the Premier League and their academies. I'm just fascinated in the whole idea of how people get on with each other and how you create an environment for people to be the best they can possibly be, which all sounds a bit glib, but actually you can, and you see somebody smile at the end of achieving something and you go, that's brilliant. So that's my sort of passion. And then the crisis volunteer is something that I'm particularly passionate about, mental health at the moment, and realizing that the crossover between our sort of work environment and our just general environment, mental health is a big stress. And I'm seeing it in triathlon. I'm seeing it in our club. I'm seeing people come to the club because they just need that release, which is...
I mean, most of the people in our club are there not because they are passionate about running, cycling or swimming, but because running, cycling and swimming and the community of triathlon have given them something that they can't get anywhere else, and it keeps them going. So I think very much what our club experience is as well.
I think actually that's a really nice way you put it there. I thought that was really succinct. Yeah, exactly that. Shall I share and carry on, Michelle? Are you happy?
Yeah, that'd be great, Chris. Thank you.
So we've done that. Let's get myself back onto slideshow. So what I want to do now is start talking about some models that you might, by models I talk about, I guess, their theories, their structures, their diagrams, that we can use in a practical way in decisions we make when we're trying to deal and manage with challenging behavior within challenging situations. So the rest of this will be about some of those, the models that you can perhaps go and explore a little bit more, and I've shared a few already. I think that there are some in here that some of you will like, and there are some in here that you'll go, no, yeah, not for me at the moment. And I really do mean at the moment, because try not to discard anything. All I would say is, if it's not for you now, park it and come back to it later, because you may find that there's a situation that actually that particular thing, that particular model is useful. So the first one I want to put up, and I'll just let you look at that, and then I'll walk you through this. Got a feeling Tracy and Jörg probably know this one. So let's just think where people might be when you're having a conversation or in a challenging situation with those behaviors. And we need to make them challenging in order to get change to happen. Okay, and the reason I say that is because if you look along the bottom and you have trust and rapport, and that's, you know, when you're in rapport with somebody, you know, when you've got trust with somebody, there's a sort of unwritten, unexplained comfort in the way that you're having conversations. I think it's the one that's really interesting if you want to see people in rapport is when we do go back to restaurants, and this is probably not most relevant until we can get back to restaurants, but when we go back to restaurants, have a look around and just see which groups of people are mirroring each other, talking to each other, that flow, that sort of connection, and it's all body movement as well. Clearly, if you're in a restaurant with your loved one and you start peering over their shoulders and sort of spotting other people, then you're probably going to get that wrong. You may be out of rapport with your loved one, so just be cautious. So that's what I mean by trust and rapport. And then up the left-hand side is the challenge with positive intent. And I mentioned that under the communication thing. The challenge is just that nudging, that sort of, I think, Susie, in your point was, you said, I can get your position, I disagree with it. That I disagree with it is a neat challenge to go, okay, we've got something to talk about here. So if you have high levels of trust and rapport, and you don't use it to challenge anything, then we have a lovely, comfortable conversation. Everybody's really happy, everything's really nice, and you all go away as friends. Things aren't going to change. We'll be very nice to each other. And you know, organizations that are like this, and you know, people say, oh, it's a very nice organization, we don't upset anybody. If, however, on the other hand, you apply that challenge straight away and you haven't built a connection with some trust and rapport, people will feel very exposed. And I'm sure you've been in situations yourself where somebody says something and you think, hang on a minute, how can you possibly say that? You don't know what I'm thinking. That's not, you know, you haven't got to understand me. You haven't got to learn my position. You've just come out and told me I'm wrong. So there's a very exposed place. And what we're trying to do is find that middle ground around awareness, to create awareness and change. If you end up at the bottom with a small amount of trust and a small amount of challenge, it's a very transactional conversation. It's one of those, you know, what did you do at the weekend? Oh, I had a barbecue. Oh, that was nice. Who came to the barbecue? Oh, a couple of friends came around. Oh, what did you have? Oh, I had steak. That's a transactional conversation, backwards and forwards. What you're trying to do is to try and find a transformational conversation, which is one where something is going to happen as a result of this. So this is a difficult situation. I absolutely get that. But we can work it out and we can come together and we can find a way of removing the challenging behavior and removing the challenging situation. So we're trying to find that balance between trust and rapport and the appropriate level of challenge and pushback. Okay. Any questions about that? I don't know how many people are in now because I can see people joining. So I don't know whether we're allowed to come off mute and share things. Are we still, Michelle?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just popping some notes in the chat box. Welcome to Mike and Paul have just joined us. We are a very small group, so please feel free to have your cameras on and unmute and contribute. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So any thoughts about that? Any questions, either in the chat box or come off mute and say?
No, I like it, and I think I call that the art of coaching. You know, to find that transformational space where I can, you know, put my position across that we need to talk about something. I might bring the evidence, you know, why is that, the effect it has on me, you know, to use that model. And then, but there's always the willingness, you know, I want to move forward, you know, and I want to find well, obviously the two of us, we want to find a way forward, and how does that way look like? So yes, the art of coaching, finding that transformational space.
Yeah. And I think what's actually challenging with this model is if you are in, let's say, one of those challenging behaviors we talked about earlier is a difference of rules or something, or a DQ, as Ian was talking about. If it's one of those, then you actually have very little time to build trust and rapport before you have the conversation that's going to be challenging. So there's something about, and going back to the point about standing in somebody else's shoes that Pam was saying, is very, very much asking some questions. So what would you like to talk about? How would you like to talk about this? How are you coming at it? Help me to understand your position with this, to give people a chance to share, because all the time you're doing that, you can create that trust and rapport. It has to be done quickly. If you leap in and go, no, don't agree with you, then that's when situations are going to be inflamed. So it's a balancing act, and they're choices that we make, and I'll carry on going through, and you'll get some more of those choices, which hopefully will answer your question, Tracy. So the other model I want to share with you is something else that's going on in our brains, and this is a piece of work by David Rock. And if anybody's familiar with David Rock and wants to sort of share any thoughts about it, then please do jump in. He runs what he calls the Neuro Academy, so he bases a lot of his work on sort of neuroscience and things. And the SCARF model, a series of things that we look for, going back to the point I made earlier about threat and reward. What our brains are doing is constantly looking for threat, constantly looking for reward, and scanning all the time to protect us. Then this SCARF model is something that breaks down the sort of elements that we're looking at and we need in order to feel rewarded and not threatened. So the first one is we'll look at a situation, and this goes for conversations in transition, conversations when you fall out about the rules, conversations with the committee and so on, how we perceive our position in relation to others. Now, it doesn't mean I have to be the boss in order to do something, but it is that sort of understanding of where do I fit in the scheme of things. And that's something that we are constantly scanning and working out. When we go into new situations, we're just working out, where do we fit in this? Are we the person who's making the decision? Are we the person who's, you know, listening? Are we the person who's influencing and steering? So that's a particular piece that we need. And by the way, I should have said, pretty much all of these come from the fact that we're a herding animal originally, and they come from a herding instinct and protecting ourselves. Certainty, and I think this one is absolutely fascinating at the moment. If anybody wanted to do a sociology degree or anything like that, right now is the right time to do it, because there's more evidence out there about how that all works. It is fascinating. How do we feel about events and people and situations that affect us? So the whole idea that if we are uncertain, it creates a threat response, because we can't process it. We can't put it into the thinking part of our brain. So it's going to constantly work in this piece of the brain, which is firing off. So it creates that threat response. And if we just talk about that now, I mean, what's happened in the last year, even now, I mean, I was just listening to the news earlier on, and there's talk about, well, we are going to get back to holidays. Well, that's great. So how are airlines going to work? And the airlines are getting quite upset by the fact that they won't actually have an answer to which countries they can fly to without testing until about 2 days before they're allowed to do it. That doesn't create any certainty. There's massive uncertainty. So there's a real general feeling of anxiety that we're sitting in at the moment, and possibly, Susie, you see that in from your role as well, the work you're doing. We're all sitting in this bath of anxiety, and then anything else that happens on top of that becomes a really strong trigger. Instead of starting at 0, we're starting at +5. We look for autonomy. It's the decision making that keeps us healthy and keeps us alive, and we have to have some level of control over our decisions. So we're looking for that all the time. The more autonomy we have over our decisions and our own well-being, we'll be more engaged, we'll be more satisfied. So again, what it's doing is putting all the processing back into the slower, more thinking piece, and helping to contain the firing of the fight, flight, and freeze. Relatedness. This concerns how we, the quality of the relationship. So this whole idea that we are part of a herd. We like feeling part of a group. It comes from, you know, that whole herding instinct that we have. We are stronger as a group. That's how we see things. So we'll constantly be working, and that actually plays, Susie was just talking, as some of you are coming back, about what it is about triathlon and clubs that brings people together sometimes, and it's not necessarily the triathlon. It's about the relatedness, the societal piece, the bit that connects us, the bit that we all come together with a common purpose. And the last one is fairness, and this is the whole right and wrong. This is, how do we feel it's right and wrong? If we feel that we've been dealt with fairly, then we feel in a good place. We get a good reward. We get a good sense of feeling, and we engage more. This is quite interesting, because those two words, right and wrong, are absolutely fascinating, who says what's right and who says what's wrong. So if you go back to, I shared that onion rings model a little while ago, and I talked about what you see around the outside is a set of behaviors, and the next bit in is the values by which you judge things. If we all judge a particular challenging event or a challenging situation or a challenging behavior, some of you will say it's right and some of you will say it's wrong, because we come at it from our own position. And that's quite interesting when you're trying to manage a challenging situation or behavior, because we naturally must think the same, don't we? We're all human beings. No, we don't, because we'll all have a different level of judgment about what's right and wrong. There's a very good coach, developer, tutor who has a particular thing. He always has this thing where he raises an eyebrow if anybody ever uses the word right. And he just, that eyebrow goes, because you know he's going to say, well, actually, who says it's right? So, but all of those things make up, and what's quite interesting in a challenging situation, and that's, you know, some of those might be very, very fast fire challenging situations we're trying to deal with, let's say the rule thing in transition, but some of them might be, you know, coming to terms with a change in the club, or coming to terms with a change in a committee, or a disagreement over spending within a club, or something like that. That can go on for quite some time. Have a look at some of these and just see where people are at. How are people feeling comfortable about their status, their certainty, the autonomy, relatedness, and fairness?
Chris, this is fascinating, and I haven't come across the scarf model. I mean, just for my just to make sense, is that a model to understand where the other comes from?
I'm always of the opinion that to understand somebody else, first you have to understand yourself. And so I do think there's something about both sides of that, and you can apply it to yourself. If you're going into a conversation to resolve a challenging situation, and you are feeling uncertain, don't have any autonomy, and don't feel it's a particularly fair outcome, then you're going to go in with a set of behaviors that are going to, you know, whatever those behaviors might be, but they might create some anxiety, they might create discomfort, they might create some argumentativeness. That's you. Equally, you can look at somebody else and say, where do they come from? Do they actually have they solved these things? And if you've got some of these things missing on both sides, you've got quite an interesting debate coming. So I think to understand somebody else, you have to understand yourself first. But I do think you can have a conversation like this. I mean, it might be that you actually say, you know, how certain do you feel about where we're going with this? Or, you know, how do you feel you can make the decisions? Do you have the autonomy you need in order to move forward? Not sure how that, I waffled a bit there.
No, that helps. No, that's good. That helps just to kind of, yeah, ground myself. Thanks.
Any other thoughts on that? Anything in chat, Michelle? Because I can't see chat.
No, all on target at the moment, thank you. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and share any thoughts or reflections on that, or if it's something that you already use, maybe? No, there's a few shaking heads as I scroll through.
Perfect.
Happy to carry on, Chris, thank you.
Sorry, Michelle, Chris. One thought, you were talking about the sort of thinking fast and slow.
Yeah.
If you're in an argument and you switch to sort of think, hang on, let's run through that scarf model. How do I feel? How do I think the other person feels? You're automatically moving into thinking slow, aren't you? So yeah, it doesn't really matter what you end up with on something like that scarf thing. It's just caused a little bit of reflection and a little bit of mental think time.
I think that's a really important point, and actually by doing that, you can change the dynamic of the conversation or the debate that you're having with whoever wherever the challenge is coming from. Because I think if you can build some reflection time in, everything starts to slow down. People start to see it slightly differently. And I do think the power of questions is huge at this point. The more questions that you can ask, the more that people stop and go, actually, that's quite a good question. Let me think about that. Okay, I've taken a breath. Right, I just slowed it down a bit further. I just slowed it down a bit further. So I do think that's I think that whole reflection time is huge in any of these managing challenging situations.
Thanks.
So the other one I want to just put in here as something that our brains are doing and building a picture that might distort our own situation and therefore create a challenging situation or a challenging behavior. Is anybody familiar with the Peter Singer work, The Fifth Discipline? Any nods or anything? Again, I can only see 5 people, so I'm a bit limited. But
I've just scrolled through and you're not getting much response just yet, so might be worth a good explanation on this one, Chris. Perfect. So basically what Peter Singer talks about is a ladder of inference, and this is how we are going to infer different situations. And this plays back to that onion rings I was talking about earlier, about where our personality and our values are much closer to the core of us. So let's say there's some observable data and experience. It's captured. It's data and experience. It's binary. It exists. Data is data. What we then tend to do with it as we go up this ladder is I select data from what I observe. So of that data, I will actually already start to be slightly selective about it. Okay, so I'm now starting to introduce that first level of judgment. The next thing I do is I add meanings. So those meanings might be my sort of cultural and personal meanings. So there may be things that I've been through in my life and ways that I see the world. I'm now starting to overlay on that even more interpretation, if you like, or inference as I'm going up this ladder. I then make a whole bunch of assumptions based on those meanings. So I'm now starting to make assumptions. Now, you know, we talk about, oh, please don't make assumptions because, you know, they're a bad thing or whatever. Actually, assumptions are really, really important, because if you go back to the whole threat and reward piece and the whole herding instinct, then we have to make assumptions to stay alive. So we're in a herd, we're out on the plains, and we see this thing walking towards us. Well, it's got 4 legs. Okay, so I'm now starting to think slow, and I'm thinking, oh, it's got 4 legs. That's quite interesting. It's got a tail. Actually, it's very similar to us. You know, we've got 4 legs and we've got a tail. And it's coming across and it's walking towards us, and it's, you know, it's got a fluffy thing around its neck. And that's quite interesting. It's got a big fluffy thing. I don't know. Let's call it a mane, shall we? By the time you've worked out and you've gone through your thinking slow process, one of you has been eaten by the lion. There are a whole bunch of assumptions that we will make in our brains as we're going through about when that thing comes across. That's quite interesting. It's coming across and it's got its teeth bared and it's sort of down on its haunches and things like that. I'm just going to assume for now it's a bad thing and I'm going to run away. So assumptions are a really, really important piece for us to make very quick decisions. So that whole piece around the Daniel Kahneman stuff about thinking fast, we feed those. They're important, they're usable. So don't always dismiss assumptions. The danger is we start to carry on applying them in this way. So from that, I draw some conclusions as I go up this ladder. And then I'll actually adopt those conclusions as beliefs about the world. So I'm now, from this data, I've added various levels of inference as I go up, and I've drawn some conclusions. I now believe the world looks like this. Right? This is me, this is my choice. I believe the world looks like that as a result. All of us could end up in a different place here, and yet we all started with the same observable data. And then what we choose to do is take some actions on our beliefs.
So I will do something as a direct result of that, whatever it might be. Now, what's really interesting is as this loop goes through, we have a reflective loop, and back to the point that was made earlier about reflection, we're constantly doing that learning reflective loop. Our beliefs will affect the data we select next time. Can't affect the data, because the data is the data, but it will affect your selection of the data next time. And off you go around again. So now we've moved our assumptions and we've moved our conclusions and we've moved our beliefs even further away from possibly somebody else's. So when we come together, we think we're all talking about triathlon. We all think we're talking about the best outcome for triathlon. Actually, we've started to part the ways, possibly. I mean, we might still be there, but it's quite an interesting one to have a look at. So in terms of some examples, just working up from the bottom, a politician just made a statement which seems to contradict a campaign promise. I'm sure that probably never happens, and that's something that nobody ever recognizes. But as you start to go up this, I'm starting to now, I mean, I've just done it. I've just added some cultural meaning and things because I've just said politicians. It's another political sellout. Okay, as you work up, I'm drawing some conclusions. Once again, he shows he has no integrity. And therefore, my belief is that every politician lies and cheats. And therefore, I'm not going to bother voting anymore. So with the observable data, I've already just moved myself up that. Now, next time I come through this, actually, why bother even thinking all that? Why don't I just leap to the fact that it's not worth it because all politicians are the same. So you can see how some of these things start to come up. A meeting's called for 9 o'clock and John came in at 9:30 and he didn't say why. Okay, John knew exactly when the meeting was due to start. He deliberately came in late. Well, actually, we don't know that because he didn't say why. So we have now added our layer of interpretation to that. John always comes in late. We can't count on John, he's unreliable. So very, very quickly, we're doing the moving through this ladder of inference, and there's lots of examples around of doing that, and you probably find there are situations in work and things when you know, when you could challenge your own beliefs.
Chris, you have got a comment in the chat from Stephen who talks about Stephen Peters, who takes a similar approach with his chimp brain and gremlins theory as well. I'm not sure if that's one that is comparable for you as well. Yeah, and we were talking a little bit earlier about that whole from the chimp paradox. Absolutely, it's we have to do this. We have to make quick decisions and we have to make assumptions in order to make decisions and move forward. Otherwise, we would be completely paralyzed if we had to think everything through. I think what's interesting here is go back and challenge some of those beliefs. Go back and question some of the beliefs, and that's where some of the work that Steve Peters and therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists work, because they actually start to unpick those beliefs. I don't want to get into the whole, but have we got any psychologists, psychiatrists online? Anybody nodding? Anybody want to explain CBT? I'm looking at Michelle's face and she's looking at the screen, and I'm just scanning through. There's a couple of smiles, but I don't think anyone's acknowledging it for you.
So what's really interesting here is how, when you look at some of these beliefs, this is when you start to look at things like CBT, like cognitive behavior therapy and some of those sort of therapies. What tends to be happening in people's brains is, I saw that, therefore that must be the case. And what they've missed out is all of the processing in between. So in very, very simple terms, what's happening is you're putting that processing back in between. So I saw a lion, it's going to eat me. Actually, the bit in the middle says it was in a zoo and there was a big moat between us, and actually it wasn't going to do that. It wasn't going to get to us. So what it's doing, it's starting to go back and just push some of those beliefs and put a bit of challenge. And it can be very challenging, CBT, as a therapy. But that's the Steve Peters work, which he did, because I think didn't Steve Peters come from a prison environment? He was wasn't he a prison psychiatrist for a long time, working with
Yes.
some fairly serious mental health issues.
Yes.
He will have seen a lot of this. Any thoughts about that one? Any thoughts about that model? Thank you, Susie. I can't see anybody else or any chat, Michelle. But...
No, just a few nods and smiles. Happy to listen along.
Cool. I'll keep pushing on. So the other one.
No, sorry, a bit slow. I was muted. No, it's very good, and I've been just involved in 2 sort of reflective pieces that I did at British Rowing around selection and new selection, and you know, reflection with athletes, coaches, and practitioners, and you know, the data. You know, there's lots of data, or data, as some people say, and it's really about what data do we select, you know, who makes the decision on what data we decide to look at. So it's really good. It's a really good way to sort of go into that slow process, as you say, to to go through it and be aware now on the back of it to make sure, you know, that the right actions, the right learning comes out of it.
Yeah. And you may challenge that. Yeah, you may say, actually, I challenge that belief, and then when you've discussed it, you agree actually the belief is okay. Yeah, we'll stick with it. This is not to say everything is wrong. What it's to say is, by slowing it down and having a think about this, you can start to understand where some of those challenging situations might develop from, and how people arrive at it. And that's when these things have been through this reflective loop so many times, they become absolute. Somebody said when we show the John McEnroe piece earlier, that his absolute belief that he was right. Okay, and how did that work when, you know, we have umpires and we have chalk and all of that? You know, the data is the data, but his absolute, you know, he'd been through that sort of thinking probably so many times that absolutely believed he was right. Okay, so now you have some choices, and I want to talk about circles of influence, control, and acceptance. And Tracy, this might start to work towards the point that you were making, or the question that you asked earlier. So if it's not, or if you want to explore this further, then, you know, come off mute and let's have the conversation. So I'll give you a target, and I'll talk through each one of these in a minute. So there's 3 things that are going on. In the center, do I have influence and control over the issue, over whatever it is that either I'm trying to solve, trying to manage, trying to get done? Do I have influence and control over this particular thing? The next level out is, do I have influence but I don't have any control over it? So I may be able to cause people to think in a particular way, but I actually don't have ultimate authority or anything like that, so I can't put the final decision in place. And the outer ring is, do I have no influence or control over this issue? Okay, so as you're thinking about these challenging situations and challenging behaviors that you're in, and maybe it's, let's say it's a difference of opinion of budgeting or something like that for the club, then where do you fit in this? Where does the other person fit? So what we'll do is, there are 3 series of actions that you can take. So if I do have influence and control over this issue, what's stopping me resolving it? And that becomes quite a tactical, quite a task-driven thing. What's stopping me solving it? Well, I haven't actually picked the phone up and talked to anybody about it. Or what's stopping me solving it? I haven't got time to think about it because I've got 30 other things going on in my life at the time. Those are decisions that we can make ourselves. The second one is, do I have influence but no control? Okay, so in which case, who do I influence? Who are the people I can get on my side? Who are the people who I can get to help me? And I can actually think this thing through because they have more control. Or how do I reframe it? How do I change that challenging situation into something where I can actually get the influence and control? And the last one is, I don't have any influence or control over the issue. Fine, I've got a series of choices I can make here. I can drop it because actually there's nothing I can do about it. I can find someone who does have something, and that's actually sometimes a very useful tactic, especially if we're working in a volunteer environment. And we've got to remember that control and influence are different in volunteer environments than they are in necessarily a work and a structured environment. And again, I can reframe it. And the point about this one is that this is the wonderful, the prayer at the bottom. Grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thoughts about that one? Anybody?
That's quite a difficult one, because if it's something you're really passionate about and you don't want to drop it, being in that third circle there is a really difficult place to be when you've got no influence and no control, but it's something you're passionate about. So it becomes a very emotive subject for people, and it's something that can be quite triggering. If you're the person that if you've, say Ian's example before, you've been disqualified on something, you've got no influence or control about that, but you're very passionate that you didn't do that, then it is a very difficult position to be in, and it can quickly get escalated there. So it's if you're the person on the other side, listening to them is fine. It's like, yes, but the British F rules say this, that's fine. But if they're absolutely adamant, then it's a very difficult situation. It becomes escalated very, very quickly.
It gets inflamed.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there are, this is one of the things about I can't change you, I can change myself and see what happens. And therefore, if you're having that conversation with somebody, I would hopefully, and I haven't had that conversation with somebody, I've never actually DQ'd anybody, but that I've never had that conversation, but I would hope that by talking about, okay, well, how can we look at this differently? These are the rules. It's very, very difficult, and I'm sorry you find that difficult, but how can you look at it differently, and what can we learn from this? And it's a tough one, but it's asking those sort of questions. At the end of the day, I also believe that if you've got something like that and you've got an inflamed situation, then go back to those attributes of communication. If somebody is very inflamed by something, then I think there's only one thing you can do, and that's listen until they've been heard. And everybody deserves to be heard. And again, I come back to this, the crisis volunteer work is very often somebody in crisis and feeling very inflamed about something just wants to be heard. And it's very interesting that if you go, that's a really difficult situation. I can understand that you're finding this really, really hard. Tell me a bit more about how you're feeling about that. Well, actually, I'm feeling really anxious. I'm feeling really, angry about it. Okay. Tell me where some of that comes from. Oh, well, I got DQ'd last week as well. Oh, that's interesting. I make it up for the point. But by having the conversation about somebody's feelings, they just get heard. Not belittling it at all.
No, I've had the situation where I've had to disqualify a child because of parental behaviour, and they've been warned 3 times about their behaviour, and left the site and everything, shook hands, and then a month later I get an investigation for bad behaviour kind of thing, and you're just like, at the time I thought I had listened to the person. I was absolutely confident that I had done everything in my power, but clearly it wasn't enough, and it's a very difficult situation. And now it's just, I don't go to children's events anymore. It's quite easy. It's an easy one, but it's something that as my work from a regional point of view, I don't want that to happen to anybody else. It's a really tough situation to be in, and I don't want any of my volunteers or technical officials or anything to have to go through that at all. So it's something that I would like to kind of do with technical officials and things like, not you volunteers and things that come to our events, is just parental, how do we deal with those parents who, it doesn't matter what we see, that it's going to become a really bad situation. So that's why I'm looking at it from the parents' point of view. They're not in a position of power, so how can they deal with it, kind of thing.
And you can't fix it for them. You can't give them a fix, because if you do, they will just keep knocking that back over the net. I mean, if you've ever been in a negotiation where you go, well, actually, you could do this. No, that won't work. Well, you could do that. Well, that wouldn't work because that's not fair. You've lost. When you get to the third idea, stop and say, well, that's okay. What do you think you can do about it? And I think there's a few pieces around this in terms of communication. One is really get under the skin of the feelings. Okay, how's this making you feel? Talk to me about your feelings. Oh, well, I don't like the rules. No, I get that. Talk to me about how it's making you feel. How are you actually feeling right now? And get under the skin of that. The other thing is to start validating that it's perfectly normal to feel like this. I know this is really hard for you. It is normal to feel. It's totally understandable that you feel particularly angry about it. It's particularly understandable that you would be worked up about it. That's a perfectly normal feeling. And that validation sometimes just gives people a go, okay, yeah, that is the case. And the last one is, so how would you like to take this forward? Because, we do have to take it forward. What outcome would you like from this conversation? Oh, I don't know. Okay, so let's have a think about what might work. You tell me, where do you want to be by the time you go home tonight? Well, I want to be relaxed, sitting down with my family. Okay, how are we going to get there? What are the steps that we're going to do? What step might you take next in order to get to that? So I think there's some quite interesting steps in terms of, first of all, listen to understand feelings. Then there's the validation. And then and what would you like to be the outcome of this? They're hard, but
it is very hard. Because I mean, they're embarrassed and things because it's their fault. Their children has been disqualified, so the only outcome they would accept would be them to be not disqualified, and it makes it very hard.
I think
this is.
Go on.
Just going to say, just watching my son's football match last night. The whole team, including the coach, blamed the referee for poor refereeing decisions that were all in favour of the other side, which I couldn't really see as a parent and not really understanding the rules of football, which doesn't really help. But people blame speed cameras when they get stopped for speeding. I've done it. It's unfair to get stopped, to get caught for speeding. People are very quick to blame anyone in authority for things that they don't like. I've had an issue this week with a patient very much similar to what Tracy seems to have had, a patient who I had to say some difficult things to, and I thought that I'd done it fine. And then 2 days later, they ring up and say I'm completely disgusting and a useless doctor and their parents deserve better. And I think that to some extent, I think that whenever you're in a position of authority, you can think that you've done everything right. And in fact, we can do everything right, but people will still go home and feel that they've been hard done by. And that's not because of anything that you've done, Tracy. All you do is follow the rules and apply them appropriately and fairly and kindly where you can. But nobody's ever going to be happy, or we cannot please everybody. I think that's a very long-winded way of saying, we all blame authority, no matter what.
Thanks, Susie.
Thank you. I think, Amy, did you have your hand up as well? Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the sort of the last point, when you feel that there is nothing more that you can do, quite often, you had that, you need to get your manager, that always kind of comes up from the other point of view. sometimes if you're deferring that, if you know that you are the buck stops with you, by deferring that and saying, oh, you know, I'm going to go away and see if I can, I don't know, buying yourself time basically, will that inflame the situation more, or is that sometimes a tactic if it is getting too high?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the person might do, but I would always tend to go for transparency.
Yeah.
I would always go for, okay, you know, this is, you've reached the top of the pile now. You know, I am the person that makes the decision, and let's be transparent about that. That is where we're at. How would you like to come out of this conversation? You know, what would you like to get out of this conversation? And I think I do genuinely believe if you can wait long enough and you can hold the silence and you can ask the questions, people will gradually talk themselves out and they will find their way forward. And it sounds glib because I can sit here and I can say that because I'm sitting in an office and I'm not actually facing that, the wrath of what you've faced, Tracy. But I do actually think it's how long can you hold on, okay, I can hear that you're really, really frustrated with this. I can hear that, you know, and I sense that you really want to say some more. What else do you want to say about this? Okay, that's really hard. I get that it's really hard. I'm being totally non-judgmental. I haven't told you anything. All I've said is, wow, that's really tough. That's really hard. And I say this because, and I keep coming back to this, the crisis thing. I think because what it's taught me is that people are so deeply in crisis that they absolutely could be spitting fury. They could be absolutely in the most challenging situation, and some of them really are. Interestingly, letting them talk and going, that's really hard. That's, you know, you must be exhausted feeling like that all the time. Now, just tell me a bit more about how you got to that. Well, that's really interesting. And there's nothing glib about that. I'm just genuinely showing curiosity and interest. And I think it's a very tough thing to do because there's a lot of fury behind that. And you're sort of going, crikey, you know. And of course, guess what that's doing in your brain? This bit's going, run away, fight. Yeah. I think it's a practiced art, but I think it's a useful one to do. But I do also think with validation, it's understandable to feel like this. It's really, you know, it's a horrible situation you're in. Yeah, that's really understandable.
Yeah, I've got a few takes there. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? Any thoughts on any of that?
No, I think it's this here is sort of a pragmatic way to sort of assess how dirty will I make, you know, how dirty will I get myself. You know, so in this case, you know, if you know straight away, yes, I have influence and control and my decision is final, yes, then obviously that's what you were just describing. So I know that I would have to stand there and either in silence, you know, if you're the referee, you know, how long can you take abuse? I mean, yeah, if you're that referee that is disqualified based on the rules, you applied the rules, it's just a question how long, not only how long he can go on or she can go on, parent, but how long can you go on? And yeah, and the other one is, yeah, it just, if I only have influence but no control over it, I'm not the authority. So I think it's a really good way to sort of assess that before I dive into where do I go with that.
And I mean, I think the point is well made that if you're doing this in the moment, that's a lot to think about. But the very fact that there's a model there to think about it means that if you're in those situations again, hopefully there's a sort of a bit of a structure to follow. Yeah,
and what I always say, you know, to do an Olympic triathlon, you wouldn't go unprepared to the start line. You wouldn't, would you? To go into a conversation, obviously this is something that you didn't see coming up, but you know that that could potentially come up. But if you know you're going to a meaty conversation, would you prepare? Of course you would, wouldn't you? You would go through different scenarios. You do the what if scenarios, what if that, what that, yeah, you would prepare. And even then, obviously, I'm not saying this here is easy, that's bloody hell. is tough, you know, that is absolutely tough. And you know, prepare the best you can. And now having that case that who was it that shared it with us? I forgot the name, sorry. Tracy, yeah. You know, I mean, this is a brilliant case, and maybe that's a case you discuss with your referees, you know, the next time when you do case studies, and maybe you practice it, you know, in real. Somebody role plays that parent, you know, because that is tough. That is tough.
Yeah.
Or why did you not select my daughter? You know, the selecting or deselect, you know, selecting, these are always selecting, no, but deselecting. They're tough, and I think it's about preparing and, you know, anticipating. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I do some work with the Premier League in their academies, and they have every season they have a selection process of who stays in the academy, who gets moved on and out of the academy, and clearly there's a big consequence if you get moved out, because all your schooling goes through the academy and everything like that. And the effort that they put into the conversation they're going to have with the parents as opposed to with the child is huge. There's an enormous amount of support mechanism for the parents of deselected children, because they really struggle with it. It's almost like a bit of a grieving process, and helping them to work through that sort of grieving process. Any other thoughts on that one? So I just want to share some. I'm just looking at time. We're probably going to finish a little bit early, but I'm very happy to take questions at the end and flick back through slides and things for those people that have arrived a bit later. But let's just think about some of the top tips, and by no means do I think this is complete. These are the practical things that might be useful. I think one of the first things that it struck me when I was putting this together, we all have a common purpose. The common purpose is that we love this sport. We want people to succeed in the sport wherever they are, whether it's be from a social perspective or a competitive perspective. We all have a common purpose. We want the sport to succeed. And I think that's actually a really powerful position to be in. Even when you're having those difficult conversations, Tracy, you know, actually at the end of the day, the parents want the sport to succeed. We want this, you know. So that just suddenly struck me, what that common purpose is. I think there's something about making a choice on how to communicate. Is this going to be a high rapport and trust conversation and a low challenge, or is this going to be a particularly challenging conversation with low rapport and trust? Where am I going to fit in that? Is this something where I'm just going to listen? It's very much a listening conversation, or is this something where I have to put some information in? And I think there is a choice that we're making all the time in terms of that. And I go back to the whole threat and reward and the what the trigger might be for the other person. So I guess if there's one word that stands out on that, it's about choice. And sometimes I think we find ourselves in challenging situations and with challenging behavior without having actually made a choice. And even just taking a breath, hitting the pause button for a second or two and choose what to say next, rather than get sucked into the backwards and forwards. I think that point that was made earlier about building rapport by understanding, standing in people's shoes, I think is absolutely vital. What does this mean to you? Help me to understand where you're coming from. What are you trying to get out of the end of this conversation? Loads of questions like that. I really want to understand your position. And the word I would use in there is about being curious. If we're curious about something, we will find out all sorts of things about people, the conversation, the challenge, behavior or situation. I think we can contract in conversation. So I spent 11 years working for a law firm, and I don't mean contract in those terms. Contracting in conversation is a really interesting thing we do. We're constantly asking for permission as we have a conversation with somebody, we're constantly checking in. We're constantly saying, is this okay with you? Do you mind if I just ask you this question? It might be a bit challenging. It's a constant contract going on. And I think sometimes that we find ourselves in the conversation from an angle that we haven't actually helped the other parties or ourselves understand what type of conversation we're having. Sometimes, and I've certainly had these conversations with people, is this something you want me to help you solve? Or is this something you just want me to understand where you're up to? And I go, oh, I just want you to listen. Okay, right. Well, at least now I know what the contract is around this conversation. And certainly that's the problem I have with my daughters. Because I'm always in there solving their problems, and they're going, no, you don't understand. I just wanted to tell you how awful it was. Oh yeah, right, okay. I do, and the point that was made earlier, and I think I said about transparency, I think using openness and honesty and transparency, I think builds huge rapport. It's painful sometimes to be transparent, but you know, there is to be honest and open. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. This is in. This is out. It's a tough one, but you'll get more respect and more credit for that than you will for covering up and maybe trying to sort of avoid a particular conversation. Listen and question to understand. Standing in their shoes. You can't write standing in their shoes often enough in any of these things. And I think the listen and question has been talked about quite a bit. I think understand where the answer comes from. And again, it's standing in their shoes. Understand what's their feeling. Are they coming from a very nervous position? Are they coming from a highly anxious position? Are they coming from an enthusiastic position? Are they, you know, what is actually driving that behavior? Where's that thing coming from? And I think ultimately, I mean, we are very intuitive, and we can switch on our intuition. We can pick things up very quickly. And the last one I wanted to put in there was a reference to Thomas Harris. I think it's still one of the best books around. It was written back in, I don't know, about 1960 something. But I'm Okay, You're Okay is a great book, and it's about how do we create a win-win here. You know, we may not get absolutely what we want, but if I'm okay and you're okay, then we're in a pretty good place. And I do think some of the good old statements are very valid and still around. So the question to yourselves is, what other top tips would you share with everybody else in the room today about some of the things that perhaps have worked for you in managing some of the challenging behavior and challenging situations? You know, some real practical stuff. Has anybody got any thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in. I think hard-earned experience, hard yards, is that actually within a club environment, some structure around ways that people can feed back to the committee. So, you know, Survey Monkey questionnaires out to all members on a quarterly basis, where there's a free format question as one of the questions, as well as some questions about what they're enjoying, what could be better, and so on. Just helps there to be a kind of a pressure release valve. And then likewise, and they obviously Survey Monkey's anonymous. And then I think also having a documented complaints procedure, and it being clear that that could be handled outside of the committee if there's issues with the committee. So a trusted kind of third party and a kind of a documented process can just give people a pressure release valve, because I think many of the things you're talking about are like right in the moment of competition, which is different, but there are also some things that just fester their way to issues. And I think if there's ways of just letting the pressure out slowly, it means it doesn't all blow on that wet Friday when you just don't want to be standing outside and you really want to be somewhere warm and drinking a cup of tea.
Yeah. And I think those feed really well. I mean, those are great ideas in terms of creating an environment that is constantly open and honest. So, you know, it's not we'll just be open and honest when we have a dilemma to deal with. We'll just create an environment where actually we feel comfortable talking about this stuff and giving each other feedback and following policies and things like that. And you hope you never have to pull the policy out of the drawer. You know, if you can write a policy that stays in the bottom drawer, then that's a win. So I think it is creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable, and what we were talking about earlier about the brain is constantly scanning for threat and reward. With, you know, if I feel my environment is fearful and I feel under pressure, then I'm going to constantly feel that I'm under threat. So I'm going to be in that heightened anxiety all the time. So the moment you turn around to me and say, oh no, you can't spend that. What do you mean I can't spend that? That's ridiculous. You know, I've gone from 0 to 10 instantly, when actually, if we knew that the context was this and so on, we'd have got there much slower and more gently. I think those are really, yeah, really good points. Any others that people have got?
Yeah, I think just generally just having I call it pause and learn moments, and build them in, you know, regularly, and not only when things, as you said before, when things don't go well, but have a regular pause and learn on the back of an event, on the back of a training block, at the back of a meeting whatsoever, and not only capture the stuff that could even be better but capture the stuff that goes well, because otherwise we get specialists in negativity and focus on all the things that go wrong rather than, you know, what has gone well. So sort of and define that, you know, be proactive in defining those moments where we do pause and learns.
And I remember you used to be able to get a pause button for your keyboard. I don't know whether anybody saw that. You used to be able to get a big red button that you put on the corner of your keyboard and had pause written on it. And it was that moment where you press that and go, take a breath, now respond. So I think that's important. And I think you make a good point about the learning. You know, the learning cycle is, you have an experience, you reflect on it, you conclude something, you plan to do it again, and you go and do it again. But hopefully the second, third, fifth, 100th, millionth time you do it, it's improved each time because you've added more and more data to that, assuming that you don't add too many assumptions. Any other thoughts on top tips before I get you to do some work?
Just scanning through, I think everyone looks happy. A lot of nods and smiles, so cementing learning and knowledge, and some great sharing there from you, Jenny and Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So as this is intended as a learning experience, and we're, you know, the growth mindset is the big subject that we're all pushing for, and opening our minds to what we can do. I do believe in actions. I believe actually sitting down and working out something that you've learned. So I've got 3 questions for you, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a reflect on some of the things that we've talked about. We've talked about what some of the situations are that will generate challenging behavior. We've talked about what those challenging behaviors might look like in terms of actually how do they come out in terms of shouting and pressure, threatening behavior and gestures and those sort of things. We've talked about where they may come from, people in that sort of heightened anxiety, that nervous situation, or maybe just passion. You know, we've seen people throw the toys out of the cot based on passion. So there are all of those. We talked a little bit about how the brain is working and that thinking fast and thinking slow, and I keep doing that. For those that joined a little bit later, this is the Daniel Siegel stuff, which is talking about this is what our brain looks like. That's the processing bit, that's the data bit, and that's the flip your lid. If you flip your lid, that bit fires 100 times faster, 1,000 million times faster than the rest of the processing. So we talked a little bit about how the different parts of the brain can either control or not in those terms. And then a series of models that give you choices. Some of those models you'll like, some of them you may want to dismiss for the time being. All I would argue is, or I would ask you, sorry, not argue, I would ask you, don't dismiss, just park them and come back to them later if they might be useful for something else. So yeah, there's a series of things in here, and obviously this has been recorded, so it could be shared, and you can go back and look at your leisure, and all the references are in there as well. So questions to you: if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, as a result of this conversation, what action will you take for yourself? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to actually write something down. Because if you say I'll take it away and I'll come back to it tomorrow, we're all busy people. So we have time. This includes you, Michelle.
I've just written mine down.
Okay, hopefully people have got something written down. This is what action you'll take for yourself. The second question I'm going to ask you, I'll give you a couple of minutes. What action will you take for your club? And by club, I mean your organization. So it might be, you know, if you're in the performance end of things, something like that. But what action will you take for your club? So if you're on a committee, or you're in a coaching team, or you're a technical official working with other technical officials, what action are you going to take as a result of today for them? If anybody wants to ask a question, please just come off mute and ask. Okay, and then the last question I got, what action will you take for our sport? So as a result of this today, what will you do differently? What action will you do for our sport? Because we do love this sport. That's why we're all here. Our common purpose. And then all I ask is that whatever you do is you look into the camera and you make an absolute promise that you'll take action. And you'll do those actions that you said. That's an emotional contract. You can't unpick. Okay. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Has anyone else got any more questions or any points they'd like to reflect on from Chris's session? I can see a few shaking heads, a few people thinking about what they've just signed themselves up to and that commitment that they've just made. Jenny's face says it all, if anyone else can see it on screen. I'm guessing that was a big promise you've just made to yourself and your club and your sport, Jenny. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Please do share your learning and experiences of the whole week of the Big Reboot conference using the hashtag The Big Reboot on social media. There's also going to be an opportunity for a feedback form to come out. So please do let us know how you found the sessions, and any opportunities to let us know how you might have implemented it and made a change would be really well received as well. We hope you've enjoyed today. There'll also be a virtual goodie bag on its way out to you. So within that, you'll find a few partner discounts, a little bit extra taken off as well to incentivize you to use a couple more things, and also a reminder of how to claim your free t-shirt for the conference. If you haven't already done so, you just need to pay for the postage on that. So there's a link will come back out Friday or Saturday to you for both of those, the feedback form and the partner goodie bag. And if you've got any unanswered questions that you haven't felt you've been picked up today, or you don't feel like you can ask now, please do contact the team at Triathlon England. We've got coaching at British Triathlon or clubs at British Triathlon. You choose which you feel is more appropriate. And then without further ado, I'd like to start with a special thanks to our presenting partner, Yellow Jersey, the Insurance for Cycling. Some of you may have tuned in earlier. And then a huge thank you, and please do unmute and give a little round of applause for Chris and his time today. I think we'll all agree that's been really useful and everyone's got something to take away. So thank you, Chris. Don't know if you can hear it. Thank you very much.
And Michelle, I'm very happy to take any questions if people have got things that they reflect on tomorrow and go, actually quite like to talk about that. If people want, then, you know, I can point them at the models and things and take, because I know some people joined late and there might be some slides in there that are useful, but I'm quite happy to pick that up with you.
Thank you so much, Chris. So yeah, if you pop those into coaching out or clubs out, we can pick that up for you.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Thank you all very much and good night.
Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
That was
models,
really
Chris. Thanks.
useful.